We see art as a useful thing that could bring about change, and I think the only way that can happen on a bigger basis is for conversations to happen and people to work together. We began collaborating by being in a band. The band kind of fell apart, as bands do, but we thought it might be interesting to try out that dynamic in terms of making artwork together. There's certain things that we can make together, but as soon as you bring other people into the process as well, it can go in lots of different directions. And I think it's those surprises that really interest us. What really excited us about working with Invisible Dust is that approach to working with scientists and the scientific community.
We've been commissioned by Invisible Dust to work with North Lincolnshire Museum. We're working on a sculpture and a publication, and we've been working on them in collaboration with local people in the North Lincolnshire area, also with scientists that study bird populations.
Commissions always feel a bit like a roller coaster. There's always that fear, I think, every time that this is the one where the carriage is going to come off the roller coaster or something. We've never done a project against the backdrop of a global pandemic, so it definitely felt like if there was going to be one that could do that, this might be the one. The lockdown conditions had almost created something that we could tap into a little bit. It has kind of created, I think, for many people a sort of newfound respect for the nature on their doorstep, and in particular, I think birds have been a real focus for people in a lot of ways. There's just something quite magical about seeing birds visiting your garden and going about their day.
Our starting point was looking at the museum's bird specimens collection. The project kind of grew from there, really. That was the heart of it.
And I think what's really nice about the museum's collection as well is it is a mixture of purchases from the museum, but also things that have been donated. And I think it's really nice how those two things come together in the museum collection and sort of inspired the way we're working, really. I suppose working with scientists and also with the public. And at the centre of it is this enthusiasm and love of nature and the natural world, really. And then I suppose in opposition to that as well, that study is having to happen because of the impact we're having as humans as well. So it sort of throws up those questions really about our relationship as a species with the rest of nature, really.
I grew up in the East Riding, so I spent my childhood watching the geese coming over, the changing the seasons, recognising it by the different birds that were there. So it's been really interesting for me doing this project because it kind of taking me back to memories of being a child and sitting and watching these birds from the the riverbank, watching them on the estuary on the other side. So there's some of the birds we used in the exhibition. One of the scientists gave a list of birds that were particularly interested in the collection because of either loss from the area, so we don't have them anymore, or because they're in decline, and corncrakes was one of them. So we're going to put that one out in the Victorian parlour. We do have some species that are no longer living here, so they really do represent that loss of habitat and loss of bird species. So the redback shrike in particular, we have 2 in a Victorian mount in the collection. Bit of a privilege really to be able to admire. I'd rather see them alive. What we've got we have to use to encourage a love of wildlife, I think. Encourage people to really value what they've got and keep it there. Yeah, I hope this project does a bit of that.
We've been working with 3 scientists quite local to the museum and to the area. So all 3 of them studying different aspects of bird migration and bird populations and bird reproduction. I suppose really thinking about the life cycle of birds and how they kind of come and go in terms of their interactions with the area.
And we had really wondered how the interactions with the scientists might work. But actually they gave us so much information, so many insights and so many avenues to go down that we never would have come across by ourselves.
Yeah, I shared some photos of eggs with them, and I kind of suggested that maybe we could include some art based on eggs, and quickly got myself into a corner where all of a sudden I was drawing a picture of a diagram of some eggs and to be included in some of their work. They were quite interested just to see whether I knew anything about some of the birds that were in that collection. I saw several examples of some of the wading species that I've worked on. The primary problem for most bird species when it comes to reproductive failure is at the egg stage. So there's several species of wading birds that have high levels of hatching failure. So you're looking at sort of like 30 to 40% hatching failure. The land is being used very differently from how it was when they basically kind of adapted to nest there. And so actually these eggs are really quite vulnerable. These birds are really quite vulnerable because of all of these kind of extrinsic things that are going on around them. And a lot of that stuff is, unfortunately brought on by us.
I just thought I'd show you a few images of these to give you a bit of an idea of where we're going with the sculpture for the museum, which is what we're working on.
One of the main challenges was to conduct the workshops under lockdown conditions. We just weren't sure how people would respond, whether people would want to join in online, and we did a lot of planning around both how to get the message out to people and what materials to prepare. So we made a series of different art kits to send out to people for the workshops. Fortunately, I think with the community that the museum has around it, all of those workshops were pretty much snapped up straight away.
So just to introduce everyone then, Charlie, Sam, Lucy and Hannah are all members of the Young Curators group that are working on a project alongside Phil and I's project with North Lincolnshire Museum and Invisible Dust. Charlie was just telling us a bit about the project. I think as well that it's been great having the Young Curators project sort of running alongside what we're doing as well. All of the young curators, they're from the area, they know the area, and I think it sort of creates this really complementary project that's about these young people from the area putting together an art trail, thinking about some of the themes that we've been thinking about as well, but really putting their own slant on it as well.
By Gwen Sean. It's an amalgamation of like different bird songs throughout different forests in the UK. I chose to pop the piece here because it's like the end of the trail and it's like a place to sort of like meditate, hear the sound and sort of like think about what we should be doing and what we should be like thinking about how to change like climate and things like that.
The thinking with a trail is when we were in the initial planning stage was how can we make something that is going to be accessible to people, particularly now while people cannot all gather indoors, and it was kind of how we can maybe have a selection of artists in one project. We took the work of Juneau projects as our starting point, which was kind of vaguely looking at birds. We didn't want to have it too kind of closed off, so we kind of went with the idea of birds, biodiversity, and we were just kind of sharing artists that we'd found, different installations that we'd found. The Young Curators programme was to bring the selection of young people, kind of early career, maybe just finished kind of their studies, kind of kick-starting something, handling the project on their own, kind of taking on some responsibility and trying new things. And most important was kind of making friends and getting to know each other and making those connections, which is lovely. Making connections with each other, but also with the artists. Yeah. Mine is the owl on the lower shelf here, the round one.
Mine is the goldfinch at the back there.
And mine is this arrogant little peacock down here, and it's called Julian.
As part of the Young Curators programme is every week we would have kind of a talk from like a visiting artist, and we had one with Juneau projects when they were looking for people to kind of take part in this. They very kindly, thought of us and let us jump in and make one.
There's not really much for young people to do creatively in Scunthorpe, and I think in North Lincolnshire a bit more widely as well, so it was a really unique opportunity.
When you find out there's like projects like these things, like creative people like come out of the woodwork sort of and like find the way, like, yeah.
I think it's really good to express these things around climate change, biodiversity, habitat loss in art as well, because things that you read in the newspaper are often based on, you know, facts and figures, and that can be quite cold and alienating. But when you've got art, you've got a real human connection, and people can understand that on a real emotional level. It's not something that's really talked about a lot here. Climate change, the loss of biodiversity, harming wildlife. And I don't know whether that's because of the industrial nature of our town and it sort of being the backbone of our economy sometimes. But I think it really should be on people's minds, especially in a beautiful county like Lincolnshire.
I suppose it's one of the things we're very interested in with the Young Curators Project, to see their responses to these questions that are coming up. It's kind of great to see how they approach these issues, and I think great to have that sort of younger generational voice kind of put to the fore, really, because it's really important.
I think for us, working under these conditions, it felt like something of a challenge to begin with, but it's been a really interesting opportunity in a lot of ways.
It's been quite a positive, life-affirming experience, really, seeing how people have embraced the project and wanted to be part of it, really. And sort of thinking about that kind of, not necessarily financial value, but this kind of well-being value that can kind of come from these processes as well, has been a really nice part of getting through lockdown, really, and getting through that process.